Hello, this is your volunteer reader Elias, bringing you news from the New Bedford Light this Tuesday, March 4th. We begin with an article in the realm of education. The headline reads, "This is the moment for Voc Tech admissions reform." As Governor Maura Healey proposes statewide changes to Voc Tech admission policies, New Bedford Voc Tech says the state needs to collaborate to get it right. A new proposal by Governor Maura Healey that would require an admissions lottery at vocational technical high schools is the state's most significant move to reform admission practices, which have been criticized for unfairly excluding students from the popular career training schools. Advocates who long push for lottery admissions are concerned about the policy's exclusionary criteria, which could still deny students the chance to apply based on their attendance or discipline records. And Voc Tech administrators have continued to urge caution in the state's decision-making process, saying the state needs to do more to test any potential changes. "It's a step in the right direction," said State Representative Antonio Cabral, who has been outspoken on Voc Tech admissions reform. But, he added, right now, if we're to go with what was on the table, it would still leave out more than 40% of 8th graders in New Bedford, who would be excluded from the lottery because of their attendance and discipline. Greater New Bedford's Voc Tech school has long faced criticism of its admission practices, with large gaps between the number of low-income students, English learners, and students with disabilities, as compared to the population of its sending districts, which are New Bedford, Fairhaven, and Dartmouth. But GNB Voc Tech recently overhauled its admissions practices. Healey's new proposal, presented at the State Board of Education meeting last week, largely mirrors those changes. In the fall, GNB Voc Tech announced that it will use a lottery system for all of its applicants this year, as opposed to running a lottery for only half its applicants, which the school has done for the past several years. However, the admissions lottery for GNB Voc Tech can still exclude students based on 2 data points, attendance and discipline. These are the same categories in Healey's new proposal. GNB Voc Tech Superintendent Michael Watson said the state needs to work more collaboratively to ensure that any policy change is supported with evidence. "I am interested in sound public policy that is data-driven," Watson said. "I am not interested in folks thinking that maybe this will work." In an interview, Watson said he was deeply concerned that marginalized students should have the same opportunity to access career training that could help transform their lives and community, especially low-income students in New Bedford. Still, he said that he disagrees with reform advocates who propose that Voc Tech schools ought to have no barriers to entry. For example, Watson said that attendance was a critical metric for the success of the school and its co-op work partnerships with local employers. "When you're absent from an English or math class, there are ways to make up learning. We can't send a lathe machine home with students," he said, referring to a heavy-duty appliance in wood and metal shops. Watson said that, according to internal data he studied, chronically absent middle schoolers did not improve their attendance once they enrolled in Voc Tech, which he said refutes an argument from reform advocates for getting rid of that admissions criteria. In 2022, GNB Voc Tech admitted students with histories of chronic absenteeism when it began tinkering with the admissions process. According to Watson, those chronically absent middle schoolers were 3 times more likely to drop out or transfer by the end of their sophomore year, and were 4 times more likely to be chronically absent than their peers. Still, many people disagree with Watson on the notion that some types of public education ought to have barriers. One of them is the crosstown superintendent of New Bedford Public Schools, Andrew O'Leary, who said he disagrees with the idea that middle school attendance and discipline data should weigh on a student's public high school experience. Many of the students who end up at GNB Voc Tech come from New Bedford's 3 middle schools, and O'Leary said the new qualified lottery system would still disproportionately impact vulnerable students in New Bedford. We forecast that the new admissions criteria will exclude up to 200 applicant students from the lottery. Many of them, O'Leary said, could benefit from job training or are from vulnerable populations, such as homeless and unstably housed students. In a statement, O'Leary commented pointedly about the difference between the Voc Tech School and New Bedford High School. Unlike screened and selective admission schools, a comprehensive district like New Bedford offers multiple pathways for student success, constantly working with students to overcome barriers to graduation. In contrast, Voc Tech schools proposing a strict exclusion of formerly chronically absent students is a disservice to students, O'Leary said. Watson believes that the state needs to collaborate with Voc Tech schools to test hypotheses about the paths of chronically absent students, something he said the state has refused to do. Watson testified in front of the State Board of Education in December and said he has written several letters to the Department of Education that have gone unanswered. Watson believes that the state should use its student demographic information in combination with individual schools' admissions data to simulate application processes from previous years. In other words, the state should play out how the proposed lottery would have worked. This, Watson said, could help answer whether chronically absent students would benefit from a Voc Tech education. So far, Watson has not heard back about his requests, he said. This refusal undermines our ability to simulate and analyze outcomes, validate progress, and ensure that meaningful changes we've made achieve the equity we all seek, Watson said during his December testimony. While reform advocates and Voc Tech administrators still have heated disagreements about the use of some exclusionary criteria, the new policy proposal represents a substantial leap forward in a years-long grind. Many specifics of the proposal represent newly achieved agreements between these groups. Most importantly, there's widespread consensus that many more students in Massachusetts need the opportunity to enroll in career training courses, and significantly, that the state government has a role in allowing for that. In a press release, Healy said that the state must work to increase access to these programs and set all of our students up for success. Similarly, GNB Voc Tech Superintendent Watson said, we should be offering a free career skills education for any student that wants one, whether at Voc Tech schools or within traditional high schools. Healy's proposal for updating the admissions policies was coupled with an announcement that she has provided $75 million in this year's budget proposal to add 3,000 seats to Voc Tech schools over the next 3 years. At the same time, legislative bills with wide support would provide additional funding to expand or update Voc Tech programs. They would also remove red tape, for instance, by allowing traditional and Voc Tech high schools to offer the same type of training if demand allows, which was not always the case by default. All this seems a far cry from when New Bedford Mayor John Mitchell wrote a letter in 2020 asking, to no avail, that the State Commissioner of Education abolish the ranked admissions process. In 2024, Mitchell complained that each year the state punts on the issue. Still more students lose the opportunity to pursue an education that fits their interests and aspirations. After the last 6 years of advocacy, all parties also now seem to agree that many other exclusionary criteria have no place in the admissions process. Healy's proposal would not allow Voc Tech schools to use academic grades or counselor recommendations to rank or deny applicants. In New Bedford, the GNB Voc Tech already removed these categories of exclusion with its updates to the admission process in the fall. Superintendent Watson, who was once hesitant to embrace such changes, said, "I'm proud we're ahead of the state and that we allowed our data-driven process to take shape." Healy's new proposal allows for attendance and discipline records to exclude students from the application lottery. These are the same two categories as GNB Voc Tech, but the specifics differ slightly. On attendance, Healy's proposal says schools can remove students from the lottery if they have more than 10 unexcused absences in a year. On discipline, schools can only remove students who have major infractions, according to the presentation before the state board. A major infraction might include anything that merited a suspension, like bringing a weapon to school, but advocates said they need clarification. Lastly, Healy's proposal stipulates that all public school districts must develop an exploration policy that ensures all middle school students are aware of Voc Tech opportunities, including through site visits and information sessions. The leading advocacy organization seeking admissions reform, the Vocational Educational Justice Coalition, said that the attendance standard was unfair. Statewide, almost 1/4 of all students would be excluded from vocational schools, according to an analysis the group issued last week. VEJC said it would petition the governor and State Board of Education to remove the attendance requirement from its proposals. Notably, the 10 unexcused absences in Healy's proposal is a more stringent threshold than GNB Voc Tech recently adopted. Superintendent Watson said his school will use chronic absenteeism, or missing 10% of all school days across 3 semesters, 27 days, as its cutoff for eliminating students from the lottery. Watson explained that this tweak gives more leeway to students while retaining attendance at. State Representative Chris Markey, a Democrat who represents New Bedford and Dartmouth, said that he was skeptical of any lottery system, though he thought Voc Tech admissions needed an overhaul to become fair. Markey, who is one of the co-sponsors of the House bill that seeks to increase funding for Voc Tech programs, said that he believes students with expressed interest in learning the trades ought to receive preference in admissions. I think we need to find a way that we're maximizing the opportunities for those who are not going to college, Markey said. There might be a kid who struggles academically but is creative in their projects. That's a kid who should go there. The public comment period for Healy's proposal has now begun, and the Board of Education will hear arguments about the criteria at a March 10th special meeting. The board is not likely to vote on the proposal until May. I think we are at a pivotal point in this conversation, summarized Watson. Admissions regulatory changes are likely coming in some fashion, he said. Until we get to a point where every kid has access, we should not stop this conversation. We turn now to news of offshore wind, with a headline that reads, "Broken Vineyard Wind Blade Damaged Again." The splintered nub of the broken Vineyard Wind blade sustained further damage last week when lightning struck it, according to the company and the U.S. Coast Guard. Based on a visual inspection of the damaged blade, preliminary evidence indicates that the blade may have been impacted by a lightning strike, though we continue to assess in coordination with GE Vernova, said Vineyard Wind in a statement Sunday night. Vineyard Wind said there is no indication of debris from the incident, which occurred on Thursday, and that current information shows no damage was sustained by the nacelle, the turbine generator to which the blades attach, or the tower. The company deployed aerial resources and at least one fishing vessel to monitor the area for debris and observe the damaged blade up close. Last summer, fishing vessels helped catch the flotsam after the blade failed. The Coast Guard said there were no reported navigational hazards as of Sunday. Vineyard Wind sits about 15 miles south of Martha's Vineyard, and the blade breakage sent debris to the south coast and islands last summer. An email obtained and posted by the Nantucket Current, purportedly from a Coast Guard officer, stated that the blade nub caught fire and detached. The Light also received a copy of the email but has not been able to verify it with the Coast Guard. Weather data shows it rained in Nantucket late Thursday night into early Friday morning. Wind turbines are equipped with lightning protection systems, since the skyscraper tall metal structures will invariably attract lightning during their 20 to 30 years of operations. A lightning protection system is built to divert electrical current into the ground in order to protect the blades and nacelle. A plan that another wind developer submitted to the federal government described the system as composed of lightning receptors in both the nacelle and blade tips that conduct the lightning current through a cabling system leading through the tower into a grounding system. Lightning strikes are currently the largest source of blade failure, according to federal data. The broken blade on Vineyard Wind turbine AW38, manufactured at the troubled Canada plant, snapped on July 13th during routine testing. In August, Vineyard Wind and GE Vernova, the turbine manufacturer, launched a plan to recover blade debris and remove the damaged root in no particular order. As of this winter, the root remained attached to the turbine hub. It is unclear why it hasn't yet been removed. Vineyard Wind said this weekend that GE Vernova plans to remove and replace the broken blade in May. Neither company responded to a question from the Light about the damaged turbine's lightning protection system. A GE Vernova spokesman in an email to the Light spoke in vague terms, stating a single turbine at the wind farm has experienced an isolated event, confirming it was turbine AW38. No injuries occurred, per GE, which is now working with Vineyard Wind to investigate possible damage. The U.S. Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, which oversees offshore project safety, did not immediately respond to questions and a request for comment. BSEE and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management lifted Vineyard Wind's months-long suspension in January, just ahead of the Donald Trump administration. The agencies allowed blade installation and power generation to resume with new safety requirements, including the mandated removal of the faulty blades manufactured in Gaspé, Quebec. Under a revised construction and operations plan, Vineyard Wind and GE Vernova are currently undertaking efforts to remove blades from a maximum of 22 wind turbine generators, more than a third of all turbine locations. A company executive last week told investors that Vineyard Wind should be completed this year, E&E News reported on Monday. In the realm of arts and culture, a headline that reads, "A tour of the Zeiterion and a whisper of an earlier reopening." For nearly a century, the Zeiterion Performing Arts Center has been a cornerstone of New Bedford's cultural landscape, surviving changing tastes, economic downturns, and the slow fade of its vaudeville past. Now the historic venue is undergoing its most ambitious transformation yet, a $37 million restoration and renovation project that will both honor its legacy and propel it into the future. On a recent tour of the theater, Rosemary Gill, president and CEO of the Zeiterion, and Molly McCarthy, director of development, highlighted the work in progress. Instead of the warm glow of stage lights, scaffolding rose where performances once took place. Not only are we transforming the building literally, Gill said, but we're also transforming how we interact with the community and how we connect with the community through the use of these new spaces. Built in 1923 and last renovated in 1983, the new Z will introduce 3 new spaces: a speakeasy lounge, a movement studio, and a second-floor lounge, while modernizing seating, lighting, and accessibility. A new marquee, historically inspired, will once again grace the facade. With $33 million already secured from city and state funding, historic tax credits, and private donors, the Z has launched the Beyond 100 campaign to raise the final $4 million. Though the official reopening is slated for early 2026, Gill hinted the curtain may rise even sooner. And when it does, the Zeiterion won't just be restored, it will be reborn, poised to shape the next century of art and community. More in education. A headline reads, "Federal education cuts threaten key school programs in New Bedford." Most of the walls inside Campbell Elementary were hidden behind construction, paper artwork, book project presentations, and classroom photos when Superintendent Andrew O'Leary came to visit last week. Kids in the gymnasium vibrated with excitement as they waited their turn to pet a therapy dog, and the curly-haired poodle mix seemed even more excited to meet them. This didn't look like a school governed by fear. In the previous month, President Donald Trump had very publicly reclassified schools as an acceptable location for immigration enforcement, rolling back a Joe Biden-era order that designated schools as protected areas. News outlets around the country had warned that public schools ought to prepare for standoffs with federal officials, and it seemed that elected officials and school leaders around Massachusetts had already dug their heels in opposition. These kids at Campbell Elementary were supposedly at the center of the brewing storm. New Bedford has more than double the English learners, as a percentage, compared to the state and national averages. And the kindergarten through fifth graders in the gymnasium were celebrating the conclusion of their annual English proficiency exams. The real threat to New Bedford students and schools is not a raid by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE, according to district and school officials, but the dismantling of federal support for education that underlies the success of the students in Campbell's gymnasium. Everything from special education teachers to parental rights to literacy programs could lose funding. Cindy Surprenant, a longtime paraeducator, watched the Campbell kids bounce around after meeting the dog. She said she's been attentive in case any students have been fearful at home, but she was not worried about anything happening to them at school. This was the safest place they could be. Other teachers around the room said the same. Later, O'Leary commented that Surprenant's job, as well as the jobs of other special education professionals, reading specialists, and many learning materials in the building, were made possible because of federal funding. It's not as simple as saying that when the funding goes away, these people go away, O'Leary said. But in an organization as large as New Bedford Public Schools, O'Leary said, where the over $200 million budget is composed of up to 10% federal funding, removing a major funding stream would have consequences. In contrast, there has not been a single immigration raid at a public school anywhere in the country. Federal privacy laws for students are among the most rigorous protections available and prevent even the sharing of data between federal agencies, including with ICE. State laws in Massachusetts similarly protect students, and the school buildings themselves are perhaps the safest physical environment where students could find themselves, with all building access in New Bedford limited to monitored vestibules with 2 sets of locking doors. What's more, students themselves are not a good fit for the immigration profile that President Trump himself has outlined. Many children of immigrants are U.S. citizens, and very few, if any, elementary, middle, or high schoolers are violent criminals. All the U.S. citizen students in Campbell's gym who were celebrating their progress learning English, and the teachers who taught them, will feel the consequences of rolling back the federal government's commitment to supporting education, O'Leary explained. That is the issue concerning this superintendent far more than immigration raids, which he says are unlikely. Working as a school administrator wasn't supposed to be a risky job, but Andrew O'Leary was recently made aware of the new stakes for Trump's second term. Shortly after the inauguration, O'Leary sent a letter to his more than 2,000 staff members on the hot-button topic of immigration. He stated plainly that the schools would follow the law. State and federal policy is very clear that student and family access to schools shall not be disrupted, he wrote. When the letter was shared by a local Facebook page, more than 1,000 comments overwhelmingly derided O'Leary and called for his arrest. Great aiding and abetting, he can be put in cuffs for obstruction, one commenter wrote. Arrest anyone who gets in your way, jeered another. O'Leary said the current administration seems intent upon generating a sense of fear and crisis around schools. He said that a sense of crisis is what's allowing the current rollbacks to happen. Those rollbacks, like the proposed dismantling of the Federal Department of Education, O'Leary said, would work directly against Trump's stated goals of parents' rights and budgetary efficiency. O'Leary's knowledge comes from more than 20 years working up through the district's finance department, where he found the federal government's commitments to education made local schools more accountable, more efficient, and more responsive to parents. A fabricated sense of crisis about public education, including fear-mongering on immigration, serves only to drive a wedge between the free public schools and the average Americans who benefit from them, according to O'Leary. The first step in supporting public schools is realizing they belong to you, and you should hold on to them, O'Leary said. They are your asset. For example, the Federal Department of Education is among the best tools to uphold parents' rights, O'Leary said. One of the department's primary functions for K-12 education is to run the Office of Civil Rights, an investigatory arm that responds to parent complaints and holds schools accountable. But since Trump took office, more than 10,000 investigations have been halted, and employees have been muzzled, according to reporting from ProPublica. Student and family petition complaints are no longer being investigated, it seems, O'Leary said. That means parents no longer have any mechanism to complain when special education plans or other accommodations are not met. Neither can families ask for an investigation into how the funds providing those services are being spent. The fact that the office is being diminished or frozen or shut down means that family, parent, and student rights are being taken away, O'Leary said. A second function of the Education Department is research, but the research arm has already seen $900 million of its contracts canceled. O'Leary says that's very harmful and would make inefficiency more common in schools. We really would be diminishing the quality of how we talk about our schools, what schools are doing the best, what is the data telling us comparatively. It's not as simple as saying, well, here's an allocation and it seems to be inefficient, therefore we'll stop it, O'Leary said. That's not a substantive understanding of the Department of Education or how it works. There are other ways that students' rights and education progress are under threat, but don't necessarily belong to the U.S. Department of Education, O'Leary said. For example, New Bedford has benefited enormously from the U.S. Department of Agriculture funding to build new school kitchens and a new district-wide central kitchen, which is now slated to open this March. And USDA partnerships have also helped states, including Massachusetts, to offer free universal lunch to students, a benefit to farmers and students alike. There's been some great success, O'Leary said, and there's a general sense now that this is something that the United States gets right and leads the world in. But the USDA is one of the many federal departments that has been subject to large-scale layoffs. O'Leary is concerned that any rollback of USDA funds would hurt students and schools in New Bedford. This has been Elias, bringing you news from the New Bedford Light this Tuesday, March 4th. I wish you clear blue skies, good health, and I'll see you next time.